Hi, I'm Theo with Audioholics, and in this episode, I'll be talking about Dynasty Proaudio's $299 WSA 5RP Plus wireless rear surround amplifier kit. So stay tuned, and I'll be right back. Let me tell you a little bit about the features of the Dynasty Proaudio wireless streaming amp. First, I want to emphasize this is not a Bluetooth connection between the transmitter and the receiver. Rather, this is a lossless audio connection that happens over 5.2 or a 5.8 gigahertz connection. It's a peer-to-peer wireless, so it requires ideally line of sight, and it happens with automated channel selection for that near lossless audio transmission quality. Now, that happens with 24-bit 48 kilohertz of uncompressed audio that's sent between the transmitter and the receiver. And the advertised distance of the unit's performance is about 30 meters or 100 feet. And as I mentioned, it really needs to be line of sight. The amplifier itself is rated at 50 watts per channel when it's run in stereo. And here's a little bit of a surprise. You can actually bridge these guys. In other words, have two of them, set them into bridge mode, and that will deliver 200 watts per channel for each bridge device into an 8 ohm nominal speaker. So how complicated is it to set up the Dynasty Proaudio wireless streaming amp? Simple answer is not complicated at all. The first thing that you need to do is to ensure that you have the transmitter and the receiver both plugged in and set up within 100 feet and that they do have line of sight within each other. Secondly, you just connect the unbalanced surround outputs and or the sub output from your AVR Pre-Pro to the transmitter. Third, if you are connecting a sub, make sure that you have the crossover set in the AVR Pre-Pro or within the subwoofer itself. You then want to connect the speakers to the streaming amplifier receiver, power up the transmitter and receiver. They'll blink as soon as both have a solid blue light. You know you have a connection between the two. Then run the AVR's calibration, or you can just follow the user manual's instructions on how to balance the channel. That's it. It's really that simple to set up. I'd like to talk about two additional use cases for the Dynasty Proaudio wireless streaming amp. The first involves setting the amplifiers up in a bridged mono scenario, in which case you would buy an additional wireless receiver for $199 from the Dynasty Proaudio site. In this particular case, you use the kit and you simply pair the additional receiver to the transmitter, set them both in bridge mono. This is an excellent configuration solution if you want to use this perhaps for a stereo 2-channel or you need more power for side or rear surrounds. The second use case pertains to the need for having two wireless pairs of speaker setups. In this particular case, you'd simply buy two of the WSA 5RP Plus kits and configure them in the same listening area. Just note there are plenty of channels between the two bands. You have a total of almost 106 channels. However, Dynasty Proaudio does recommend that you set one of the wireless transmitter and receivers to the 5.2 gigahertz mode, and that will be indicated with a green color LED, and to set the second one in the 5.8 gigahertz mode, and again you'll see that with a blue LED to avoid any potential interference from each other. I want to pause for a moment and outline 4 simple steps that are listed in the user manual that will make or break your experience with the Dynasty Proaudio wireless amp's performance and help you avoid popping or distortion if you're considering the product. You will see online user reviews that talk about popping and distortion coming from speakers that are connected to the amp, and these users most likely fail to read the manual and follow the steps that are outlined there. And here they are. Number 1 is you want to set your AVR's channel output for those channels you'll be using with the Dynasty Proaudio streaming amp to the maximum audio level that you'll encounter in programming. Number 2, you want to confirm then that the left and right channels that you'll be streaming are balanced with an SPL. Number 3, you want to start the amp's wireless receiver volume to a low level to prevent clipping the amp. And then finally, If you are hearing popping or distortion when listening to programming, then you want to adjust the attenuation setting on the wireless transmitter from the 0 dB down to a -6 dB and finally down to a -12 dB setting without touching the volume controls on the Dynasty Proaudio wireless receiver. Now let's turn to some measurements. And surprise, the Dynasty Proaudio amps measurement simply floored us. Gene Delasala measured the Dynasty Proaudio wireless amp performance using his Audio Precision APX 585 8-channel HDMI audio analyzer. The test signal was fed to the wireless preamp transmitter since the amp itself lacks inputs. Look on Audioholics.com for Gene's full report. The Dynasty Proaudio amp should sound consistently good regardless of loudspeaker impedance. While it's not load invariant, the Dynasty Proaudio amp exhibited very good frequency response linearity under varying load conditions. Open, 8 ohm, 4 ohm. The Dynasty Proaudio amp is clearly optimized for a 4 ohm load, but you will get a slight treble boost of about 2 dB at 20 kilohertz if you're running an 8 ohm nominal loudspeaker. The sampling rate is 48 kilohertz as advertised, and you can see a sharp roll off at half Nyquist at 24 kilohertz. The Dynasty Proaudio amp exhibited shockingly clean harmonic spectra, as Gene said, when tested at 1 watt output. You do see some power supply harmonics, -8 dB, but nothing to worry about there. Next, let's look at power versus distortion. Gene wasn't expecting a low distortion amp, especially when the test signal was being transmitted wirelessly. But again, surprise, the amp's lowest distortion, its highest synad, was about 80 dB, 0.01 total harmonic distortion and noise at 25 watts. The Dynasty Proaudio amp delivered 45 watts a channel with 2 channels driven at less than 0.1% total harmonic distortion and noise, and 47 watts per channel at 0.1% total harmonic distortion and noise, and 55 watts a channel at 1% total harmonic distortion and noise, with both channels driven into 8 ohms. Pretty impressive. The Dynasty Proaudio amp delivered 95 watts at 0.1% and 109 watts per channel at 1% total harmonic distortion and noise, with both channels driven into 4 ohms. Gene remarked again and again to me that that's pretty impressive for a pint-size amp, and it should have plenty of clean power, especially for its intended use for rear surround or even potentially side surround speakers, or if you just want to use this for streaming to a pair of passive speakers in a 2-channel system. The Dynasty Proaudio amp goes into what Gene called beast mode when you bridge it, and really surprised all of us. This little amp delivers the theoretical 4-fold power increase. It yields 193 watts at 0.1% total harmonic distortion and noise, and 227 watts per channel at 1% total harmonic distortion and noise into an 8 ohm load. Gene then overlaid synad, so you can see the amp maintains very low distortion up to about 160 watts. Many amps that Gene has tested over the years in bridge mode typically only yield double their rated power at 8 ohms. And Gene remarked to me that he could see a use case for linking the wireless preamp of 2 of these amps in mono bridged for higher power amp applications. If you are running 8 ohm nominal speakers, it is not recommended you do this into 4 ohm speakers in bridge mode. The Dynasty Proaudio amp delivered 45 watts a channel into 8 ohm load and 104 watts into a 4 ohm load of dynamic power at 1% total harmonic distortion and noise. These measurements were similar to the power sweeps, indicating that the power supply really doesn't have much headroom, which is typical of an SMPS regulated power supply that you find in many of these Class D amps. You can see here the dynamic power table if you want to reference it at a glance. And then finally, let's look at the subwoofer frequency response. And you can see that it's good. There's no bass management in the unit. Bandwidth was limited at -3 dB at 240 hertz. So you do still need to activate external bass management, either in your AVR or in the subwoofer itself, if you desire a lower crossover, such as the THX 80 hertz standard.
In the power of my hands, I hold 200 watts. Guys, I have to tell you, I'm really impressed with this little Dynasty Audio wireless amp. I wanted to take it into the guest room at Audioholics and put it on some really good equipment. So I have my Denon A110 SACD player, and I've got some Revel F328BEs. Now this is overkill for a product like this, but I wanted just to hear what this is capable of. And when I put on some SACDs, I used Clara as one of my SACDs, which she's got a wonderful sounding SACD. I noticed that it was a good soundstage presence. The bass was tight, it was linear. And overall, the tonal balance was a little bit more forward, a little bit brighter than what I heard on my Denon A110 integrated. Now, it's not a fair comparison because this is a $4,000 amp, super high quality. This is why it's a reference amp in this room. But you know what? It wasn't embarrassing. It gave us respectable performance that I was not expecting to hear. And after I made a little adjustment, I had to lower the attenuation to -6 dB. There was no clipping or anything that I heard. If you're going to set this up in a 2-channel environment and you're plugging it into an SACD or a CD player, just realize that the standard voltage for SACD or CD is around 2 volts RMS. It will clip the preamp. So you got to set the switch to -6 or -12 and then adjust the volume control accordingly to how loud you want it. But overall, guys, this thing drove the system pretty well. And if you have a pair of speakers lying around your house, a pair of passive speakers that you're not using for whatever reason, this will bring new life to them and it'll allow you to actually enjoy these speakers again for only about 300 bucks.
Now that we've looked at some measurements, what's some real-world experience with the Dynasty Proaudio wireless streaming amp? I connected the wireless transmitter and receiver about 20 feet away from each other with a clear line of sight, and then I used the unbalanced pre-outs from my Anthem AVM90 to connect the rear surrounds to the wireless streaming transmitter. I then fired up Dune. I played especially the Sandworm and the Spice Harvester scene, as well as the Ornithopter Escape scene, which have ample surround information. And I will tell you, I was shocked. I was pleasantly surprised that I had zero distortion, zero popping. I had a great sense of envelopment, decent dynamics, and no latency when I was playing all of that content through the wireless transmitter. To further emphasize the fact, I then shut down my other amps, leaving only my front, left, and right Revel Ultima 2 salons, plus the rears, and then I also left the sub-actives. I played those scenes again. Once again, I had zero latency, zero distortion, zero popping, and no issues whatsoever, just the creation of a nice sound field. This little guy really caught us all off guard. Great measurements, great performance, and if you can put this in a line of sight, it may very well prove to be a solution you've been looking for, especially if you've been challenged to put side or rear surrounds in your home theater setup simply because of the fact that you couldn't run wiring, you had other obstacles, or frankly, aesthetic challenges that prevented you from doing so. At $299, it's not an inexpensive investment, yet at the same time, it really solves a lot of challenges at a really good value. So, my take, if these are some of the challenges that you've been faced with and you want to get your home theater up to par, give this little guy a try. It really impressed us, and it might just be the perfect solution for you. So until next time, keep listening. And don't forget our Patreon channel at patreon.com/audioholics. We appreciate your support. You'll get direct access to us, you can ask questions, and you can even suggest topics for future programs.